because we're a commodity product, if someone's going to go, oh, I'll leave Chrome, a perfectly fine browser, it has to have interesting features, compelling features, incredible design. Like, we really need to make a pitch because many people are not thinking, oh, I have this massive problem with my browser. At the same time, because we're a commodity product, people do their work out of this thing, and people expect a certain bar, and they expect a certain level of stability, and people are dealing with very serious things on their browser. And so in a way, like, we kind of can't choose between interesting features and stability, and we need both. One is why people will switch, and the other is why people will stay. So the membership team is, I like to say it's one of the weirder teams at the browser company. We are part of every experience a member has after they download the product, and we focus on how well they understand the product, how they like the product, good or bad, and also if the product is high quality from like a bugs perspective. So we're involved in things like building the help center, all of the customer support, and then user research and quality engineering and like issue tracking and things like that. Some months are completely about how well is our performance doing, and like how are we, you know, making sure we're not regressing the product in any way, or like getting ready for something like launching Windows where we're constantly testing for bugs and bug bashes. And then other months are like super exploratory user research on features that the design team hasn't even built or hasn't even thought about building yet. It's just really, it's kind of based on either what's on fire or where the strategic goals are headed. We incorporate users, or we call them members, we incorporate members as much as we possibly can when it's helpful. So for example, if we feel super strong intuition that we're gonna launch a feature or something is objectively better for members and we love it and it's like aligned with strategic goals, we might not include members in that case. But in cases where we're not sure, we pretty much always add them to our process. And that can look in a number of different ways depending on what the question is. For example, you could just turn something on and see if people notice it or have a reaction to it, do an A/B test. So that's like probably the easiest route. We do that actually in a small way every single week because we have a test group called Early Birds that literally get our features before we launch them. That's for quality primarily, like making sure it's not buggy. But sometimes we hear reactions about the feature that kind of reconsiders whether or not we'd launch. It's not the primary goal of that group, but that's like in a small way, a way we involve members constantly. We also like show prototypes to members. We run surveys all the time. We give Sparkle builds, which are like test builds of a new feature to members all the time. And we'll either do moderated where we're like watching them use it, or unmoderated where like they record themselves using it and send it back. So that's the way, I mean, it's super dependent on what the feature is. But I think one thing to double click on right now is we're trying to actually figure out how to learn from people who are not ARC members, who are not members of our product. And that requires us to actually like go outside of the bounds of our audiences. We have a really strong, like active community that actually loves to do research with us. We're very lucky in that sense. So in order to learn from people who don't use ARC or who might not care, like, which is honestly, like average people don't typically like care to be so heavily involved. Like these are exceptional people who care. We've had to try some pretty unique strategies. So for example, right now we asked our members, we actually asked them to introduce us to their friends who don't use ARC. And so in a way, even when we want to go outside of our member base, we still involve our members in that process, which is kind of cool. Before the browser came along, I think people were inherently interested in the internet, but nobody said it. And we were the first to kind of say, the internet is so cool, right? Like, couldn't we be using it better? Like, why are we all using this crazy cool thing in this like square box? And everyone, like not everyone, but a lot of people were like, oh wait, like that is interesting. And I think we were the first to give a name to something that people kind of felt inherently. I also think this idea of like problems you have with your browser, typically around like hoarding tabs or like having too much stuff or like that one window that you minimize that has like 40 things like that are like very individual experiences that people think is just a me problem, and they blame themselves for that problem. And I think the fact that the browser company was like, hey, we'll help you make it easier to make a mess like that. Like we'll figure that out for you. Like you're not alone. Like here's a solution for it. I think made people feel like very seen and heard.
Could you explain if you at all involve users in like the creation process or like the initial ideation of a new feature or a new product surface, and like what does that really look like?
Yes, so we absolutely do. I'll give an example actually most recently. So we were thinking about how to redo our onboarding process, like the first session of being on Arc. And we actually had no idea how to go about that process. So what we did was we started by showing the product to a bunch of people who've never used Arc before and just watching them try to navigate around. We had no idea or inclination of what we wanted to build. That was our first step in the process, is just like watch what they do with Arc as is. And then actually, because we wanted to test so far like what would resonate, we just like removed onboarding altogether. Like, okay, so here's Arc today. Let's watch a bunch of people do it without any onboarding at all. And so I think like our goal there was to, from learning on like the extremes, get some opinions about what must be in this new iteration before we even started designing. And then we took that to Charlie, one of our designers, and Omar, who like revved on our version that we came up with now. So I think that's an example. Another one is just like talking to people about their feelings about the internet. Like for example, like if I closed all your browser windows right now, would you be bothered by that? Like, did you just get a scare in your heart? Like, how does that make you feel? Are you like gonna kill me for doing that to you? Like, just watching people's reactions. For example, that made us originally think we shouldn't build auto archive because people all reacted really scared. The problem though with user research is then actually we built auto archive and everyone loves it. So you can only get so far with some of that like before you have a product stuff. But we do incorporate members into like right now we're building something we're experimenting with something net new, and we are building it alongside a board of like user testers, I guess, to work on it with us. We wanted to learn from a set of people who've never used Arc before and who aren't in our typical early adopter market. We recognize that the people who use Arc today are probably like early adopters, love new technology, or at least are on the cutting edge in some way, or maybe are connected to people on the cutting edge. Like we recognize that. So in order to just like learn how we could expand our market a bit, we wanted to learn from people who maybe have never even heard about Arc. So what we did was we asked those current members, like our most loyal fan base, like who's that one person? Because we all have the person at a dinner party who is like, so why are you using this weird thing? Like who is that person who would never ever use Arc? Let us talk to them, and we'll pay them actually, because we know they don't care about us. Like what's in it for them? We're gonna pay them to work with us. And so we put together this like big survey where we kind of asked them all of these demographic and sentiment questions to ensure that they were not early adopters, that they never had heard of Arc before, that they're not typically someone who likes new things. They don't have extreme opinions about AI or something like that. Like they're pretty just like, I just want to get my shit done and like I'll use whatever tool works to get me there. We found like a set of people who fit that, all of those criteria, who wanted to be paid to share opinions, and we kind of created what I'm calling like an advisory board, who we're gonna work with for like 8 to 10 weeks and just like show them things and ask them questions like, what would you do if you had extra time in your day? Like things like that, just to get to know them as people and what resonates with them from like a value propositions perspective as well.
From the membership lead perspective, like how do you consider quality in the product? Like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so I think there's a super healthy tension. I love this tension. I'm calling it a tension in a positive way between design and membership sometimes in this exact question of quality, because in my mind, how do I measure quality as the membership lead is retention, is like, are people not churning? Are people staying? And when they leave, why are they leaving? And I think sometimes, and I know design cares about that deeply too, so that's not to say they don't care about that, but one of our tenets as a company is like make them feel something, like start with feelings. And so where they might optimize for like what might be actually better taste, I often take the route of like, if it didn't affect retention, like, should we do it? Like that kind of thing. And I think when I scratch the surface, the biggest things that affect retention are how easy the product is to understand and how well it performs from like a stability, bugs, speed perspective. So those are the things that I'm usually focused on is like, yeah, usability and performance. But I think that, so for example, I'll give an example. We ran a test where this project I was talking about where we tried to redo the onboarding. We, from user research even, so this is like slightly on me, ran a test where we qualitatively watched people go through all of these different ways to onboard, and we came up with one that we thought was the best. So we put it in the product and it didn't change retention at all. So we were like so heartbroken, like, wait, we got all this qualitative answers, I guess, or what we thought were answers around like, this is a better way to onboard, but the numbers didn't really change at all. And so then the question becomes, should we ship it? Like if in an A/B test it didn't perform better, it stayed the same, should we ship it? And that's where it comes down to design in a lot of cases, because it's like, so what's better taste, you know? And so in that one, we did the one where we were like, we watched a bunch of people and we felt better about the one that looked easier. Maybe the same number of people like fought through it, the harder experience as the people who like went through the easier experience, but like that we're gonna go with the one that we think, that's where we lead with feelings, I guess. I'll give an example of like the sidebar. Yeah. So the sidebar is not easy to learn. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial by saying that. Like people, they come into a new browser, I watch their mouse go up to the top because that's just where their mouse goes. Like if you're watching a user interview of someone try Arc, their mouse just hovers at the top of the screen and you're like, no, the tabs are on the left, right? It is not easy at all to train yourself to go to the left. When you've been on Arc for 60 days and you like get rid of the sidebar and you force someone to go back into Chrome, they are like, or whatever their previous browser was, they are like, oh my God, my tabs are so small, I can't see anything, I can't scroll. Like, so in that case, like what might be a simpler learning experience is not the same as like the better UX. Like I think the UX here is better as a sidebar, even though it's like a harder learning curve. Now, I think the question we're asking ourselves is like, many people won't even give it a chance if it's hard to learn. So like how important, like is there a trade-off that's worth making around like, if most of the world won't even give a chance to a better UX, but it is a better UX, is it still worth making that? And that's still an open question for us.
Is there some kind of like iteration or prototyping process or attention to user feedback or something that certain teams have cracked that you've noticed like makes them more successful in building or makes them build a higher quality thing?
I think that the pods that are typically most successful at the browser company are the ones who make decisions quickly. So whether that's because the inputs are clear enough to help them make the decision, or they just have enough like internal understanding where like the conversation is quick, or just maybe it's conviction, maybe it's not even member feedback, maybe it's just conviction in something, and also just like, you know, the engineers and designers are like ready to go with the next thing to test. So I would say like the correlation between like whether or not a pod was able to be successful, and sometimes success for us, by the way, means removing something from the product or deciding not to ship something. So success to us is not something is added or changed. Sometimes it's a decision made, right? And so I think that the pods that are most successful are the ones that can come to that decision the quickest using whatever inputs or like grabbing the right inputs to make that decision. I think quality is in stages based on where it is in the process. So for example, you can make an assessment on the quality of a product of like how it's designed. Does it meet a member need? Like that's a part of quality. And then there's this stage of like, is it fully polished? Like, have you thought of every edge case? Is the usability clear? Are the click targets big enough? Like, is the text accessible? Like, there's that. And then I would say that the final stage is making sure that the technical quality is really high and that it's not going to introduce more bugs, that it doesn't regress performance, like things like that. And so I would say the thing we give up most on might be the last one, because we do a pretty thorough job of like design polish, of like making sure it addresses a need. I can give examples of cases where we haven't, but like we've gone through those revs enough. I think the next step for us is making sure that like we're constantly tracking performance regressions and like introducing bugs by introducing a new feature. And that's because usually the minute we have design conviction, we want to like get it out to members immediately, because we love to see member reactions and we also just care about building the next great thing. So I would say that's the place where we could grow most. That feels like the trade-off we're giving up on right now. In a way, the lack of hierarchy and the lack of like mandate of exactly what you need to build at any given time is both an accelerator and a decelerator. It's an accelerator in that like no red tape, go try anything. You know, if you want to go 100 miles an hour, you can. Nothing's going to stop you. You could ship it tomorrow if you really wanted to. But in a way, it's also slows us down in that if you go 100 miles an hour, but like it wasn't quite, directed at the goal that the team needed from you, what is it all for? We think people work the best when they're working in their style. And we would never mandate or force a certain way of working, because that feels counterproductive to the best work being produced. And so what we do is we place a lot of trust in the pod lead to know how they work the best, but also to understand the members of their team and say, you create an environment that works for your team. Maybe the environment of like an iOS team needs to feel different than an environment of like the DevOps team that's like working, on keeping things really stable. Maybe that like functionality and how they work together is different than a team that's like constantly prototyping. So rather than like assume, one of our values at the browser company is assume we don't know. Rather than assume that the leadership knows what the best way to work, we pass that on to as close to the work as possible on like process. And so in a way, like we kind of can't choose between interesting features and stability, and we need both. One is why people will switch, and the other is why people will stay, or maybe a little bit of both is why people will stay. So I would say when we make trade-offs about the two, it's kind of like we set a bar for what we're able to get away with a little bit. And we do everything that's, meets that requires us to meet that bar. We try not to do more, because then we can't be as flexible like to take on new interesting projects if we're like super bogged down on any one part of it.